Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's DataVox Webinar, Tips, Tricks, and Taboos of Working from Home. My name is Jessica, and I will be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this webinar through Cisco WebEx events, and the audio can be heard through your PC or by calling into the phone number listed and with the access code provided in your confirmation email or calendar invite for this event. Today's webinar is being recorded on behalf of DataVox, and participation in this event indicates your consent to being included in that recording. All attendees will receive an email with a link to the completed recording 24 to 48 hours post-event. If you have questions for the presenters at any time during this presentation, you may submit those questions via the Q&A feature to the bottom right of your screen. This should already be turned on. Simply click Q&A and the text box will appear. Our presenters will be responding to those questions throughout the presentation via text and will respond verbally throughout the presentation and also at the conclusion of the presentation. If you are in need of support or have a question not pertaining to today's topic, please utilize the chat feature and I will be happy to assist you. If this feature is separate from the Q&A feature and can be turned on by clicking the chat bubble in the lower center of your screen. Now that we have reviewed the features of this webinar, we would like to start off today's presentation with a few words from our VP of Managed Services at DataVox, David Wilson. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. We're excited to host a series of these webinars in April. And I would encourage you to go to our website and check out www.datavox.net and get a list of all the upcoming webinars and make sure you register that any that you're interested in. I'm very pleased today to introduce one of our key partners in the unified communication space, 8x8. And we're very fortunate to have Justin Robbins presenting for us today and give us some tips and tricks and taboos of working from home. So look forward to that, Justin. Just Jessica said, please feel free to keep the chats coming throughout the presentation. Justin likes to keep these presentations as interactive as possible. So please keep the chats coming and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. With that, I'm just going to hand over to you, Justin, and over to you, sir.
Awesome. Thank you, David, Jessica, and everyone who joined here today. It's an interesting time that we find ourselves in, and as David mentioned, that interactive piece, I would love for us all to be doing this together right now in person, because I think it's an interesting topic, even before the current circumstances that we find ourselves in. But here's what I'm really hoping to do in the little bit of time that we have together today, is I want to be able to tackle a couple of topics that I've experienced and really in being a remote worker for over a decade now. And as we mentioned from the title, I want to talk a little bit about some of the tips, some of the things that I've learned, that I've experienced as a researcher, but also what are some of the things that maybe have been taboo topics in the past. Even just this morning, I saw a message, Gary Vaynerchuk, if you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, launched VaynerMedia, many things, had a post that just a couple of years ago, he swore that he would never have his teams work from home. And now the past few weeks have had him think completely different about that model. And so it's interesting to see how this is changing our paradigms and the way that we think about work from home. A little bit about me quickly is I actually got my start of my career at the age of 12 in contact centers. Believe it or not, had a tap on the shoulder as a paper boy saying, Justin, would you like to earn some cash in the evenings? And so what I did was interrupted people's dinner times to sell them newspaper subscriptions. Interesting start to a career in contact centers, but what I found that I fell in love with was communications. I found that I fell in love with how do we make sure that we can effectively connect peer-to-peer to front-end agent to customer, from senior leader to the front line. How do we make sure that those connections happen? And I've been fortunate throughout my career then to lead some amazing teams at some incredible organizations. A lot of what I want to talk to you today is actually about my experience in running some global training organizations, also some global training and consulting teams that helped organizations really over the past 2 decades figure out how do we effectively enable work from home. And what I want to do is I want to take some of those learnings and I want to put them in a place where we all find ourselves right now, where we unexpectedly now have our entire workforce that has had to work remotely or has become very, very distributed as a result of circumstances. And how can we take those learnings and how can we take what's happening now and put some things into place so that this is a sustainable behavior for us. And then I hope that as a lot of our conversation today, you have some questions, you have some things that you'd love to dig in on, that you'd love to talk about further, and if so, there's some contact information on how you can reach out to me. So here's one of the ways that I'd love to make this interactive. Actually, as we go through this, I want this to be driven in a lot of ways by all of you that are here with us today. What I'd love for you to do, actually, just now as we're getting started, is through that Q&A function, I'd love for you to start sharing what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing right now, either as someone who's working from home or as someone who's helping organizations work from home successfully. What are some of the challenges, questions, or even uncertainties that you find yourself facing right now in the midst of having people work from home? I want to take a look at some of those as they come in, and I want to actually address them as I go through 3 distinct topics. First thing that we're going to talk about, this idea of leading from home. And here's what I mean by that. We find ourselves in this interesting place where we are perhaps having teams now that are reporting to us, and we are no longer in the office together. Maybe you just find yourself that, again, you're working with leaders and helping them figure out how do they effectively stay connected to their team. So we're going to look at some of the things of how do we lead from home. Next piece that I want to look at is really this idea of engaging from home. And here's what I mean by that. There's a lot of really interesting things happening for us as remote employees. There are a lot of things that are competing for our time, a lot of things that are competing for our attention. And we've got to figure out how do we effectively not only remain engaged with the people that we work with, how do we help teams keep their employees and their leaders engaged, but how do we also make sure that we engage with the people who we may share our home with? One of the interesting trends that I've seen in the past few weeks, as you've got an increase of people now working from home who typically don't do that, and there's been some research to support it, is we've actually seen an increase in the amount of time that people are spending working during the day. They said that in the past 2 weeks, as work from home has increased, the average amount of time, I want to say it was something about 2 hours. They're working an additional 2 hours a day. And what does that mean from a long-term sustainable behavior standpoint? And then the last piece that I want to touch on is this idea of productivity from home. This, I think, is one of those kind of real challenges that a lot of us can face, is if we're now competing with spouses or pets or children, or the distractions of our cell phone, or that website that we really liked to occasionally browse when we were in the office, but we weren't able to have it up all the time because we knew somebody would walk by. All of those things now are competing for our time and attention on being productive. And so some tips that we've got there. And then lastly, as we mentioned, maybe this will spawn some additional questions from you, some other things that you'd love to know as you're being a remote employee yourself, as you're leading remote teams, or as you're coming in as a trusted partner to people and helping them figure out how do we really tackle this new normal. Because the interesting thing I think about where we're at right now, and just yesterday was on a webinar actually with a customer, and she said something that I told her was probably the most profound 6 words that I've gonna kind of anchor into for a while. And she said that, Justin, disaster recovery is not business continuity. And what I think what's interesting about the current work from home trend is a lot of us have tried to put a disaster recovery plan into place that now we found out isn't going to work for us long term. And I really do believe that the board level conversation for the next year and a half, 2 years is really going to be around this idea of business continuity and how do we make sure that work from home really does become a key part of how our organizations stay successful. So here's what I do. I really hope that today gives you some practical advice, some things to help you survive and thrive. Because let's face it, this isn't normal for any of us right now. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that up front. This isn't your typical, hey, here's how you work from home, because right now it's just a little bit different. And so with that, I hope that these tips help you right now, but also help you as we really do find what normal looks like moving forward. So let's start with this idea of lead from home. And like I said, keep bringing your ideas in through the Q&A tab, and want to get to some of those in just a moment. But first I want to talk about what are some of the key attributes that I think about when it comes to leading from home. And these are actually based off of three different things. Number one, it's based off of research that I've done really since about 2012. Spent the last 8 years just researching what does it look like as an increasing percentage of the workforce has become distributed, as an increasing percentage of the workforce has gone from home. I think the question a lot of us wrestle with is really understanding, are those teams more productive? Are those leaders as effective? Are those employees as kind of prone to receiving promotion and recognition and acknowledgement? And I think the answer to a lot of those things really isn't a factor of whether they're in the office or whether they're at home, but it's what leaders choose to do in the midst of those circumstances. And so that's why I think the first piece for us to talk about in effective work from home environments is this idea of leading from home. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that stat about the average work from home employee. They said in the past, a couple of weeks, it seems that there's a plus 2 hour increase in the amount of time that they're working in the day. And one of the first experiences that I had as a remote employee, so right now I'm based in Pennsylvania on the East Coast of the United States. And at the time, I had a team that was working all over the world, had people in Australia, had people in Europe, had people on the West Coast of the United States. And one of the first things that I discovered is when you're in an office, you've got a set time in your day, and maybe you had email or some things on your phone, but it really was easy to set work-life balance if you wanted to. But the minute that we've all gone to home to work, and we see this true in that plus 2 hours of additional work time each day, is that now this idea of work-life balance changes significantly. In fact, what I realized early on as a leader of a remote team is that maybe I found that some of my most productive time was after my kids went to bed. So it's 10 o'clock Eastern, on 10 o'clock Eastern time, and I had this great idea, and I decided to send an email out to my team, and this was one of these things I just found that was a productive time, and so I'd send these emails out, and it wasn't but a couple of weeks, and I had a conversation with some of my teammates, and one of them spoke up and said, "Justin, I need to bring something to your attention. When you're sending these emails late at night, I almost feel this obligation that I'm doing something wrong if I'm not working late as well." And the concept of work-life balance isn't anything new, but I think for us as leaders, leading the way on what work-life balance should look like is something that is maybe new for some of us. And as many of us are now going to work from home, it does present a very real challenge to, I know last night, as a great example, I was working from 8:30 to 10, but one of the behaviors that I put into place is if I had some ideas for an email, is I set it for a delay send so that it hits an inbox when it's more of an appropriate time for the person that was receiving it, as opposed to just doing that. So for my first tip in leading from home is it does create this really interesting tension point for people on figuring out what work-life balance looks like. For your employees or your coworkers or your clients who also have kids who maybe typically were in home, now this idea is incredibly difficult for them because now they've also become teachers or child care centers or all of these things right on top of it. So I think it's really important for us to set the example. Was working with a client last summer when I was still working in a consulting practice, and one of the things that I loved that she did with her team who was remote at the time was she just had an open grace rule that she said, you know what, there are going to be times when kids are going to barge in through the doors behind an employer. There's going to be a time when there's a doorbell that won't stop ringing. And she said, and part of this environment of us all working from home, part of this environment of leading well and showing work-life balance is saying that, it's not a normal office. And so we've got to have some grace in there. So that's number one, set the example for work-life balance. The second piece here is really being intentional about when, where, how, and to whom you communicate. I think one of the interesting things about innovation that happens in an office versus innovation that happens with remote teams is in an office, you and I can intersect in the hallway. And as we're walking from our desk to the break room, we can be talking about that idea that was just kind of worked through in a meeting. And we can build on that there, or we just happen to be sitting within a certain group of people, and naturally throughout the day we have these conversations that create momentum, that drive innovation. When we're remote, that often isn't the case, And if your schedule is like my schedule has been, what you find is that you often spend so much time in meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting that if we are not intentional about where we should have those additional kind of like innovation moments that might happen in the hallway, or where we should have that follow-up discussion, right? Very quickly, what we're going to find out is that now innovation is happening in a vacuum, or worse, it's not happening at all. And so one of the key pieces of advice that I give to someone who's now new in this place of leading a remote team is truly being intentional about these places of when, where, how, and to whom you're communicating. And that's one of the things that I like about business productivity today is we really do have tools and resources that make it easy. It makes it easy for me to be on a phone call and realize that phone call now has quickly spun into an idea that I want to pull 4 other people into the room, right? And how can we agilely move that? And we're in this place now where we can innovate in those ways, but it's about being intentional about when, where, how, and to whom we communicate. Third piece is this idea of accessibility. So one of the teams I worked with was Hershey, sweetest place on earth, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And one of the things about my office at Hershey is I had 3 windows that had sets of blinds, and then I had my door there. And part of my role there at Hershey was involved a lot in our training and a lot of our quality programs. And so there were often need to be a lot of closed door conversations, but I also wanted to be really, really intentional about my open door. And so my team knew that if my blinds were open and my door was literally physically open, that's when I was there. I was there. I was able for people to just come in to ask questions, to come, have those conversations. Again, working remotely, we've suddenly lost those things. And I think one of the small intentional things that we can do is create that virtual open door policy. Actually, just this last week, I had the opportunity to interview one of our executives at 8x8, Brian Martin, and I'm actually going to share sound clips of that here later this week from that interview. But one of the things that he had mentioned and others on the team had mentioned to me is this idea of setting specific time in their day where their team knows they can just pop in. And for them, they have it on camera and they send the link out to their team and they said, hey, you know what? From this time to this time, my door is open. Pop in. And I love that because it's being, again, intentional about those opportunities for accessibility. We're probably all getting inundated with chats or emails or phone calls or messages and texts and all of these things. And so I'm not saying that any of us aren't accessible. I've got to believe that we're probably all, our people can get more access to us than we know what to do with sometimes. But it's making those gestures of saying, like, here really is my open door time, my time for you to pop in and to provide insight. So love that idea of thinking differently about how you make yourself accessible, again, to your teams, your coworkers, and the people that you're serving. The fourth piece, and this is the trainer and the coacher and the developer in me, but one of the things that always upsets me when I've looked at the research on what happens when teams move to work remotely is that often those remote or distributed employees are at a disadvantage to their learning, to their coaching, to the development opportunities. And I think this is also one of these really big opportunities for us as leaders, especially in moments like these, to set ourselves apart and to make it a priority. For me, those conversations do happen on video, and this is going to go into one of my tips that I'm going to mention again in a moment. But to me, being intentional about development is a priority. Actually, earlier in the year, my team and I at 8x8, one of the things that we put out is actually a piece of content intended for remote employees who don't want to get passed up for that next promotion. Because that's a very real challenge that we discovered, that often it was people who were in an office who were more prone to receive promotions as opposed to their counterparts. And when we look at an environment where we may be all working remotely for perhaps just an extended time, but we also know that some organizations are going to adopt this at a much wider scale moving forward, right? It becomes this place where we've got to be intentional about making that a priority so that we truly are developing and advancing and recognizing our top performers. And what we're going to discover is often they're probably based remotely for us. And right now, they're definitely based remotely for us. And then this last piece is about authenticity. So for me, I've been a remote employee for about a decade. I spend almost all of my time either on camera, behind a microphone, and so I've invested in a remote workspace that is, very clearly built for the function of what it is. But I've been on calls right now where people are sitting at the end of their bed. I've been on phone conversations where people are on their patios, and I've been on conversations where there are toddlers crawling, babies crying, dogs barking, and pure chaos in the background. And it's been fantastic because in every single one of those moments, what I saw is that people were willing to still show up in the midst of an unexpected circumstance and be authentic to who they were. Now, with that, I think that we have to absolutely set parameters. And I think that the way that we lead our team may be different than how we interact with the customer. If you've got that kind of high prospect that you're looking to work with, might not be the best time. You might want to try to find some circumstance on what you can do to minimize distraction, to minimize noise. But these are the moments where leaders truly show up to be authentic, even in those moments where your house might not be perfectly in order. I clearly didn't do my hair today. It's in those moments where we're willing to be authentic that things truly stand out, that people truly stand apart. So that I'm going to take a minute. I'm just curious to see what we've come in from a Q&A standpoint on this front. So just curious if the team can share what are some things that we've maybe seen coming in as far as questions so far, if we've seen things coming in.
So not so many questions, a lot of comments on what they've experienced so far with COVID-19, some printing issues, connectivity, performance issues. Obviously, a lot of us are feeling the same isolation feelings, losing a little bit of sanity as well. Issues around shared drives, supervisors and their expectations on managing employees that maybe have not worked from home before. So the new dynamics of our environment. You touched on how meeting spaces and work from home like balance. And looks like some issues maybe with like teammates and kind of just how working from home is a new dynamic for a lot of people, and how maybe because you do not get back to somebody in the right amount of time that it feels that you might be getting escalated to managers and getting yourself in trouble. Additionally, hardware issues and some administration access issues.
It's interesting to hear some of those things mentioned, and so there's a couple things that I want to put as a follow-up, and we'll connect with the DataVox team and all of you who've followed up. There have been some resources that we've definitely put together to help tackle some of those things. But I think there were a couple things that you mentioned that stood out to me that I want to talk on when it comes to this idea of leading from home and what that looks like. So first, on the connectivity front, I think it's very interesting to see what this kind of global from home, stay home movement has done to infrastructure and frankly the internet and bandwidth. We see this from like streaming TV and providers like Hulu, Netflix, and YouTube have talked about how they've even changed their streaming rates to kind of accommodate all this bandload. I know I've actually talked to a number of different organizations who, it's putting so much strain on infrastructure. That actually I think is one of the key vulnerabilities that as we look at our long-term business continuity plans, and this is one of the things when it comes to leading from home that I think we need to be really intentional about is these are the moments right now where we are learning the lessons about what is working and what is broken on our business continuity plan. And what's going to happen for a lot of us is we're just trying to get through in the moment as leaders. And then it's going to be 3, 5, 6 months, maybe a year, and to really do a solid post-mortem on this. One of the things I would recommend in the right now is to really be documenting what things that are challenging, what are the things that need to come back and maybe find a short-term fix right now, but what are the things that need to change long-term? I know we've been seeing this conversation from just on a phone call earlier this morning who someone said their typical RFP process could take almost a year, and they said like all bets are off right now. They needed to make a change happen in less than a week, right? So I think that it's really interesting right now for us as leaders to be documenting and understanding where we have these challenges and not. The other piece from leading, and this is actually a really nice segue to engaging from home, is as a remote worker, one of the things that I would naturally do, so I'm very social. I love interacting with people, which goes to my first thing I said of I wish we could be doing this in person right now. One of the things that I found was really great as a remote worker is that's okay. I'm involved in my community. My kids are in sports. They're in dance. I go out. We have game nights with friends. Right now, as a remote employee who had that connection, I've been stripped of all of that. For brick and mortar employees, that social connection was, it's something in the community, but it was with happy hours with coworkers. It was, the fun things that would happen on the first Friday of the month. And we've all been stripped of that. And social distancing, though, I don't think has to mean social isolation. And what I think is an interesting thing for us as leaders is to be creating those virtual opportunities to be engaging with our team, which is actually going to take me kind of to my next point and some things that I think that we can be doing really, really well to make sure that we don't feel socially isolated. This even goes to the point as I heard some of Sammy mentioned some challenges of peer-to-peer or coworker to coworker, and how do we rebuild some of those relationships and make sure that there's not miscommunication. From the very first day I worked remotely a decade ago, leveraging video was something that was a non-negotiable for me. And here's why. Number one is I find that I learn a lot about a person when I can look them in the eye, when I can watch their facial expression, when frankly we can just see each other. And what's interesting is it's not just me. There's actually a ton of research and science and psychology behind what happens to you and I when we see another human face. And the awesome part about that is it helps us build relationship. It helps us engage in different ways. It helps us communicate more effectively. And one of the coolest things, so about 2 weeks ago, the team and I at 8x8, we set up this website, which is 8x8.com/live. And all that we wanted to do with it was curate the conversations from around the globe on how people were using video, how people were in the midst of social distancing, in the midst of stay home and flatten the curve, how people were finding ways to come together. And what I saw was leaders setting up happy hours for their team, where virtually they all came together and spent time connecting. What I saw was coworkers setting up karaoke nights or trivia parties or whatever it would be, all through video. Over the weekend, my wife and I, so she has 2 siblings and we all live apart by multiple hours. Over the weekend, just because of what's been happening, we got together for a 4-hour game night. And what we had in that moment was a realization of right now we're all doing this out of necessity and to keep us sane. But there are going to be opportunities and things that moving forward, this has now really become a mainstream way for us to engage as people, which to me I think is exciting. And I think video really does become the linchpin in us doing that well. Now, that said, some really practical things that I think are important for us to be engaged as we're working from home. So for me, I think that there's 3 things that could be mistakes that we need to be aware of. Is number one, when we're all allowed to leave our houses again, and some of you are continuing to work from home, you're going to want to go to a coffee shop. When you're at that coffee shop, be very mindful of whether or not you're leaving your laptop or your phone unattended, whether or not you've got a privacy blocker on your screen, and what you're doing when and where, because working from home creates this high risk for us to be taking our devices out into public and for something to happen with them. The next piece with that, when it really comes to security, is what we're doing on our work laptops, or on our work computers, or on our work devices. When we're in the office, that's easier to police. It's easier to enforce, and we feel less prone to maybe spending time on websites that typically we do on our own once we're home. Now that we're just home, suddenly it's very easy for the work laptop to become the personal work laptop. And when we're doing this, there's opportunity for us to expose ourselves to risk and vulnerability that might not typically have been the case if we were working strictly on work things. So being really, really careful of that. But even simple things like I have a coworker who he purchased a device called Tile, which is just a tracker. And so his laptop, his phone, everything, he has Tile on that. So in the event that it were to become lost, that if too much distance separates them, that they'd be able to relocate it. So just being very mindful of, now that we've brought work home with us, that data security risks increase if we don't do the right things. Now, I talked about this in Lead from Home, but I think a really important piece of being able to engage in your work from home is to minimize distractions. There are a couple things that I personally do that I think are helpful for this. Number one is I'm intentional about what's in my background. Now, right now, I'm in a basement, so I couldn't have a window behind me if I wanted to. But there was a time when I did have a window behind me in my office, and what I found was that people on the other end of the conference were often watching what's happening in the window behind me and losing sight of the conversation that we were having. And so that was one of the key pieces there. Now, it might be actual interruptions. So I've got a wife and 3 kids, and there's cats in the house. And at any moment, if I wasn't intentional, I could have kids popping in. I could have cats walking across my keyboard, but being intentional about setting time and space. And so they know that when the office door is closed, that it's not okay to come into the office. Now, are there protocols that if there's an emergency, yeah, my phone's right here and my wife would shoot me a text, or there's things that we do. And so it's about minimizing distractions, but know that you're not going to be able to eliminate them entirely, and be okay with that. Again, working from home is not working in the office, and your favorite FIDO is probably going to be there when they might not be in that boardroom conversation that you were normally having. Now, that said, I actually think that distractions are an important part about being a remote and a work from home employee. So there's 2 things that I recommend that I've done that I encourage teams to do, and that I think are just really fun practices. Number one is to schedule those water cooler moments. As I mentioned, you often have that hallway innovation where you get to walk from one meeting to the break room and talk about that brainstorm. For me, it's truly that. It's finding 3, 5, maybe 10 or 15 minutes even, if I can squeeze it throughout my day, where I just grab somebody on my team or somebody that I've never really gotten to connect with and just say, hey, let's hop on video for a few minutes. What'd you do this weekend? You know, what's the best show that you're watching right now? What's a good book that you read lately? I know your kids are in karate. Tell me about, you know, now that they're staying home, you said their instructor was sending videos. What are they doing? Like, how have they been adapting? Anything to build those moments of humanity. Because again, if you work from home, and if you, like me, are going to be doing this for a really long time, those are so important in building relationships, not just with our employees or our peers, but our partners, and really, you know, so many people from there. But then the last piece of this, you know, I would say this is one of those moments where I'm going to give you all advice that I think I need to hear myself. And it's this idea of, don't let working where you live mean that you only live to work. When smartphones, you know, really became mainstream, work became pervasive in our lives in a way that it had not been before. Leaving the office really meant leaving the office, but you know, suddenly we had email, social medias, real-time monitoring on our contact centers, whatever it would be, all of these things now in our device, and it was really easy for it to follow us home. Now it has followed us home. And I've talked to people now every day who've said, Justin, I've had every single meal I've been at my laptop, or you know, I've not been great about kids' bedtimes because that I've just found that that's the best time for me to be productive, or you know, I can't go out. I normally go, you know, to this thing on Saturday mornings, and the tennis courts, the gate's locked. So I don't have anything else to do, so I'm just going to work through it. And I think now more than ever, we need to remind ourselves that that's exactly what we should not be doing. And I know for some of us that might be more difficult than others, and maybe we're really good at it, but we have to remind others, and they don't want to hear it right now because the thing that they love most, they're not able to do. But I think it's really important for us to be our best selves at home, at work, to make sure that we're not letting work become all-consuming now, because it's going to be easier than ever before for that to be the case. Sam, I'm curious on this idea of engaging from home. What have we seen come in? What are some thoughts and comments or questions that have come in from the group?
So we're, I guess, a little bit about the hardware, a little bit of the reverb on conference calls. People now using headphones through laptops or computers versus calling in via cell phones. Some issues with latency, obviously. Everyone's being challenged at home with kids and bandwidth constraints. A little bit of conferencing capabilities, phone and video are some of the questions that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, particularly on the latency front, with what are some things that people can be doing to get through that. So there's a couple key pieces for me. So one of the things, so what I personally do at home is on our Wi-Fi, we're actually able to set priority devices. So that to me is one of the first places where I started. Actually prior to this, my wife and I, we significantly upgraded to make sure that we had the best Wi-Fi that was available for our area. But what we've seen in this situation in particular is that again, kids are home, people are home. It means the Roku's streaming nonstop. It means they're all on their devices. So at a very local level, one of the things that we've definitely done in my own home is to figure out what can we do to improve our own internet package that we have, but also be focusing about setting priority devices. I think this is one of the interesting things when we look at the tools that we're using. One of the challenges, so this for me in leading contact centers, one of the big challenges for us is that we had so many tools in our stack that they were not only draining on the network, but draining on the device itself. Which for me, that's I've been a big fan of simplicity for a long time. That I think this is a kind of a key opportunity for businesses to be thinking about how do they make sure that they're consolidating effectively. How do we make sure that we really are leveraging the tools in the best way, and even to the point on video. And this is one of those things that nobody is safe from this, right? Because it's not even about a platform as much as it's about what's happening on global bandwidth constraints. Is really being intentional about spending time on video, as I just mentioned, leverage video, but also if you need to, relying on audio. I think at the end of the day, especially if you've got really core messages to get across, you always want to make sure that the audio quality of the interaction is going to be superior, right? And I think that's one of the key things to be thinking about, as we are leveraging, video and these things, to make sure that end of the day, audio is definitely the thing that needs to be getting by. But these are some great questions. And, one of the things that I'll mention, we could probably spend all day, if not more, talking through some of these questions. So if there's some of these that we're not getting to specifically, and I'm just looking through some, some just kind of interesting, like technical things that people are experiencing, we'll definitely follow up with you to make sure that everybody gets some feedback and response to some of the things that you're sharing. And thank you for continuing to share just what you're experiencing and what's going on here. So one last piece that I want to talk about really comes down to this idea of being productive from home. And I think this goes to the idea, I saw one of the questions that came in from a gentleman, Charles, and if it's the Charles that I think it is, hey, Charles, it's good to see you. It came into the question of how often should the staff meet via phone or video conferencing. And I think this comes down to this idea of being productive, right? Because we're now not all in the office together, I think one of the defaults that we go to is assuming that we have to spend all of our time together in a meeting, which is not the best practice. I've seen teams do some different things where one team that I'm a part of actually created a daily kind of war room call where, we're all together and It's that big opportunity where people are thinking, where they're collaborating, where they're driving innovation. But then from there, actually trying to be intentional about taking meetings off of the schedule so that people can still be doing, whatever work they need to be doing outside of the meeting. So, I think that's the best consultant non-answer I could give you, Charles, is it really comes down to a matter of, what you're trying to drive and what's the most effective medium. And maybe that is a once a day meeting, or it could be a bi-weekly. And I've got a separate team where it's just, we have 30 minutes every 2 weeks, and that's exactly what we need to do to make sure that we're moving things forward. But that's it. So what are 5 key tips that I'd leave you with as we kind of start to come into the home stretch of this thing? Number 1 is to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. One of my peers wrote a blog and gave a great piece of advice on here. And what he said was, I would use the time that I'd normally commute to get some extra sleep. He said, or if you're somebody who already has a good sleep schedule, get an early start on the day with a brisk walk, get outside, get fresh air, and then right to the computer, you'll feel energized and ahead of the game. And again, I know for you, maybe taking care of yourself was the yoga class that you went to, or it was, the tennis session, or maybe it was just being able to go out and get your hair done every 2 weeks. And again, we're in this place of we've been stripped of a lot of things, but I really do believe that, and we've seen this, and I've even seen on the 8x8 platform, everything from jiu-jitsu classes to knitting clubs to karaoke nights to yoga classes. There are still so many places where people are doing this, and more importantly, they're opening it to the communities for free. And I think that's intentional to take time to whatever that thing is that you love. Again, don't let this be the reason that you can't do that. Maybe you can't do that, you regularly play with a bunch of buddies basketball. I tried that on video. It doesn't work the same. It broke a bunch of hardware. But just saying there's lots of things that we could be doing. Second piece here is I think it's important to figure out what your ideal environment is. Now, this might mean that for you, you're thinking, Justin, I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment, and that means that I've got this one corner in my living room. Then, do whatever it means for that space to really feel like your own. I knew one person who they didn't have really good space in their house, but they didn't park their car in the garage. And, what he did was kind of channel his inner startup entrepreneur and just made it a really funky, interesting space. For you, it might be a recliner. It might be at the kitchen table. But find that space where you really do feel like you can do your best work. And in some ways, maybe even save that for when you really have to do your best work, is make sure that's where you spend your time, so it becomes something that's meaningful for you. And that might sound interesting, but for me, having meaningful workspace really did make a difference for working from home. Now, that said, and it goes back to this point of disruptions, is I think it is important to set planned disruptions to change your environment throughout the day. And maybe it means it's just taking, for me, I will tell you, one of my planned disruptions throughout the day is going to get the mail. It's the highlight of my day sometimes, because that may be the only couple of minutes that I get outside. But every day I set 15 minutes, and that's my mail run. And it's just going out, it's getting fresh air. So maybe for you, it's a 10-minute walk. Maybe it's going on and, to the point of the devices. Maybe it's going and spending some time, reading a blog from your favorite blogger, whatever it might be. Set those planned disruptions throughout the day. Be intentional about it, because otherwise you really will become all consumed in work. The next piece here is then to find your perfect time. And I know some of you are morning people, some of you are night people, some of you are at the mercy of the meetings that you have to be a part of. But for me, this isn't actually, now that you're working from home, your perfect time isn't just up to you. It's not just up to your work schedule, but it really comes down to a conversation that should be had between the rest of your family or housemates. And for me, again, one of the biggest lessons that I learned in working from home for as long as I have is that my work from home experience is not just mine. It's shared with everybody in my house. So be intentional. Have open dialogue about what that schedule looks like, and every day I brief my wife. The first thing I do before I come into my office is she gets the brief on my day. She knows when my distraction time is. She knows when the webinars or these things are happening. And we found that when we have that open dialogue, it really does make the entire experience better, not just for me personally, but for me with my coworkers, with my colleagues, with my partners as well. And then the very last piece that I want to give before we take any last questions or things that come in is to be disciplined about your device distractions. We already are really at the most distracted time in history. There are so many things vying for our attention everywhere. And now at home, there so many are convening all together. And so maybe for some of you, it's about your device, and I've got mine right here, right? And it's making sure that you're intentional. Maybe it's making sure that it's face down. Maybe it's saying that, hey, I'm really addicted to the Instagram, Justin, and I've got to scroll through that Instagram feed. And it's saying, okay, set those intentional intervals, not only because it becomes part of your break, but it's also then something to look forward to. And I have another coworker who they said a 25-minute timer, and they said, you know what, Justin, every 25 minutes, if I'm not in a meeting, I get my 5-minute fix. As long as you get your work done, end of the day, I'm not going to fight you on that one. But it's about building these breaks, building these muscles, really being disciplined about how we're spending our time at work. So I'd love to see a couple of questions that are also coming in. I want to first say that I appreciate the time to share just some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. Again, really try to make this practical and what are real world things that we can be doing. Of course, I'm part of the 8x8 team, and I see one of the questions that came in specifically was about 8x8, so I will answer that question here. But what I'd encourage is, I hope what I shared today is really getting to the point that myself, the team, we want to be here as resources and getting through not just the current situation that we all find ourselves in, but long-term business continuity, long-term success isn't just a matter of technology. It really, at its core, becomes a focus on people. It really becomes a focus on process. And if we're not, having well-rounded discussions around those things, it doesn't matter what tools we invest in. If we're forgetting about, really people and the supporting processes behind it, no tool is going to solve the problems that we have. That said, I see we had a few more questions. So one question I'll answer specifically because we're on that topic, and I did see somebody ask the question. So they said, "How can 8x8 help a remote workforce environment?" There's a couple things that really practically are top of mind for me. One at kind of a very kind of basic level, our video conferencing tool, 8x8 Video Meetings, is available completely free. You don't need to download it. We don't have time limits on it. It's actually, you actually don't even need to register to start a meeting. You can register and get some more features, but again, it's free, and it's just 8x8.vc to give that a try. So that's at a very practical level. We've really tried to socialize with people everywhere who need at the bare minimum a video tool to help them get connected. That's something that's available. At a bigger piece than that, really have to me, the unique piece, and I didn't mention this about my background, but I had always been a practitioner for my entire career, was always running customer support teams or training teams or consulting teams, and never worked for a technology provider. But what really caught my attention about 8x8, particularly in unified communications, is that they were the only technology platform who literally built the entire video, phone calls, messaging, contact center, all on one platform. And in a lot of cases, you see providers where it's different platforms that they, kind of turn into what they call, their name becomes the Frankenstein, because you've got this system bolted, this system, bolted here and here and here and here, but it's really one tool. So again, goes to a conversation that I had yesterday. I can do it on my desktop. I can do it on my phone through my 8x8 app. I was on a phone call with someone, and we had an idea, and we said we want to brainstorm this with a bigger group. We literally, with the click of the button, turned that one phone call into a multi-person video conference. While in the meantime, we're also collaborating through collaboration and chat rooms that we had set up, and it's a single technology piece, so it's all one tool. So that, to me, when you think about working remotely, it's not just about the visibility of the screen to screen, but it really comes about your tech stack. And even again, the 8x8.com/live is cool because we've curated stories. But we've even had now in the past couple of weeks businesses that in 24, 48 hours needed to move their team remotely, and that's the beauty of the cloud. That's the beauty of really what's happening with technology like 8x8 is you can quickly deploy it agilely and not have those same disruptions to your business. So hope that helps. But I know our team would love to talk more about that. I have full transparency. I really am. I'm a contact center, a customer experience, a content guy. But I know that our technical and our customer support teams and partners that you might interact with, any one of those would love to have more conversations about that. So that's it. It looks like we're about at time here. Some other questions that I'd love to follow up with offline, but again, all of you who joined, I'm super appreciative. David, Jessica, thank you for having me. I'm gonna turn it back to you guys.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Justin. What a great presentation. I think we all really enjoyed it and are walking away with some really good tips. Thank you guys so much for joining today's webinar. As a reminder, the recording link for today's session will be emailed to all attendees 24 to 48 hours post-event. If you enjoyed today's session and would like to hear more, as David mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, we do offer new webinars weekly and daily. We have another webinar coming up tomorrow. Please check our website for more information on upcoming sessions. And as always, we would love to hear your feedback on events. Once this webinar has ended, you will be redirected to a survey page. If you could please take a moment to complete the survey before closing out your browser, we would greatly appreciate it. That concludes our session for today. Thank you again to Justin for a great presentation, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.